Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.
Welcome to Unsiloed. This is Greg LeBlanc, and I'm here today with Rebecca Neuberger Goldstein, who is the author of many books. I think you have an affiliation with Harvard University, but you are a philosopher and a novelist, and now, I guess, somewhat of a psychologist. And I'm going to have to ask you about this because I've encountered a number of philosophers who have written fiction, none who have really made it as central as you have to your career. But I want to know a bit about that journey. But of course, the first book, Mind-Body Problem, which I still have an old tattered copy of many, many years ago. It seems like almost everything you've done since then has its origins or roots in this book somehow. You're already thinking about all of these issues in your earliest stage of your career. But also, you've written about Spinoza. He's one of your areas of expertise. This book, Betraying Spinoza, which is part of the Jewish Writer series, really, really fantastic, great, concise summary of Spinoza's work. And then this book, which came out a couple years ago, Plato at the Googleplex, right? Why philosophy won't go away, and thank God it won't. I think that should be the subtitle.
Yeah,
and
I didn't know whether that subtitle would be understood as a threat or a promise.
Right. Well, this other novel, right? 36 Arguments for the Existence of God, and the most recent book called The Mattering Instinct, How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us and Divides Us. And I think there are a couple other books that I failed to mention, but welcome, Rebecca.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So I mentioned that these topics in The Mattering Instinct, they have deep origins for you. I mean, you have been concerned with this issue, but you didn't really have, you didn't have a framework or a title for it as elaborated as you do right now. And you said that this latest book was the one that took the longest to write. Why did it take so long?
Why did it take so long? Well, partly is because this theory began to work out in my mind, and it's a big theory about human motivation, and it starts with physics, which was my first love. I studied that as an undergraduate, and then went into philosophy of science, and yes, I broached the subject in trying to understand my fictional character in that first novel. And then it escaped from me. I found some of the ideas being picked up by other academics. The thing that really blew my mind, I formulated something called the Mattering Map in the novel. It was a kind of collaborative effort between me and my fictional character. I don't think I would have come to it without her.
Well, I mean, I think you said that when you started the book, you didn't really know where it was going to go, right?
I knew the end. I knew the end of the book. I knew, the plot line. I knew what was going to befall these characters. But I'll tell you, my editor at the time, who went on, we were both very, very young. We were the same age. He was just starting out. I was just starting out as a untenured assistant professor of philosophy. And he had asked me a question about my character. And that's really where everything started. And he said, he had bought the book. He liked the book. He said, and then we had our first face-to-face meeting. And he said, I'm still mystified by your protagonist. She's very beautiful. She's very bright. She's very lively. She's very sexually desirable, and that gets the plot going because she has lots of affairs. Right? But she's so unhappy. She's always on the cusp of despair. Why? And I could hear that. In my character, that she was unhappy. She was dissatisfied with herself and her life. And I thought about it. And then I kind of heard her answering me, which was, she said, because I don't matter in the way that most matters to me. And that was such an interesting idea to me. The idea, in that sentence was the claim that, look, everybody needs to feel like they matter. And then there's a great diversity of ways in which we might try to prove to ourselves that we matter. And that is the way that most matters to us. And if we don't feel that, we feel as if our life is a waste in some sense. And you can even, be getting lots of attention from other people, as she was, anybody she wanted to seduce, she could seduce. But there was something so missing from her. And then she marries what she really wants to be, which is somebody who can contribute something substantial to the life of the mind. And she despairs of ever being able to do that. And she marries that. It's not a satisfactory answer for her. And that was the core of the novel. And together we come up with this idea, she and I, of the Mattering Map. I say it was collaborative because I was very self-conscious about being a woman in a male-dominated field, philosophy of science. I was super, super rigorous in anything that I would philosophically write. It had to be very, very rigorous, preferably written in symbolic logic. It was, so this idea of the Mattering Map and mattering and what matters to a person in order so that they can justify themselves in their own eyes. This was too vague for me as a philosopher, but then writing a novel freed me up from the stringency that I had self-imposed as a philosopher, and so yeah, I really kind of think of it as almost collaborative between me and my fictional character.
Yeah, I mean, it makes you wonder whether or not we ought to assign more novels in our philosophy classes, right?
Yeah,
But
I think you can do something at least I can do something in novels that I can't do in straight philosophy. As soon as I'm writing straight philosophy, although I freed myself, as you can tell from this latest book, I am freed from the tyranny of rigor that of my earlier life. There are things here that are not as rigorous as an analytical philosopher would want them to be. Some things are rather metaphorical, some of the claims I make.
Well, indeed, this is a huge project and something which I think you were right to be initially skeptical of, right?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
I mean, you quote Wittgenstein, and he said, I don't know maybe why we're here on Earth, but it's certainly not to be happy.
Yeah, poignant statement.
Yeah, but it seems like contemporary psychology is kind of obsessed with happiness, right? And certainly the way we think about positive psychology. I know you've worked with a lot of folks in positive psychology. There seems to be this concern with happiness, but in a way, right? If you narrowly define happiness, that's not something that makes us any different from other animals, right?
Yeah,
and I think the aim of your project is to come up with a new explanation for human uniqueness, right? And it's this homo justificans, right? That's who we are.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
We are. And there's something really estimable in the burden we place on ourselves. We are wired, like all living creatures are wired, to strive after our own survival and thriving. That this is what biology is all about. And
dogs seek pleasure as much as we do,
exactly,
right?
And the things that give us pleasure, food and sex, and playing, but food and sex in particular, right, we're programmed for this. This is going to help our genes to replicate into the future, and it all works according to natural selection, which itself is derived from the second law of thermodynamics. It's like a beautiful scientific story you can tell until you get to us, right? Because what we are creatures of matter who long to matter. I love that we can do that in English. We can't do it. It can't be replicated in other languages, but thank goodness for English. Two amazing words, the noun matter and the verb matter.
Both of which come from mother, right? Which
yes,
it never even occurred to me until you pointed that out.
Our alma mater is our nurturing mother, and it's a real sexist story how this word matter got into our lexicon. It carries the Aristotelian bias that men matter more than women. Actually, that's
Well,
what.
it started sexist, but then it came full circle, right?
Exactly, exactly. But that this is, of course, something that is true about our species, that there is a deep bias that women are kind of failed men. That's how Aristotle considers. But so there's a whole interesting story behind this word, the noun matter and then the verb to matter. But there's this whole story you can tell on the basis of the laws of physics and then the laws of biology that gets us to a certain stage, But what we are, this amazing species, is we want to justify these laws in our own case. These laws make us very disposed to pay an awful lot of attention to ourselves. All creatures are wired to pay a lot of attention to themselves in order to survive long enough to replicate their genes. That's how it all works. But we can step outside our lives and ask, am I really worth it? I spend so much time thinking about myself. What makes me, of all things in the universe, worthy of all this attention I give myself? And that sets up an unease in us. The existentialists talk about this ad nauseum. That is what the existential nausea is, with Sartre's wonderful novel, Nausea, that it's the kind of absurdity. When you step outside yourself, you see how arbitrary your own identity is and all the attention you have to pay to yourself that's kind of pounded into your very identity. But what am I? I'm nothing, really. I'm here for a few decades and then gone, and what difference am I going to make? And the universe doesn't give a damn about us. And so there's a sense of absurdity. But the existentialists say, face this absurdity. That's authenticity. Live with this absurdity. That's not what most of us do. Most of us go about trying somehow or other to justify ourselves in our own eyes. So it's really getting back to something that the existentialists spoke about a great deal. And that's what I mean by the mattering instinct. We don't just, most of us don't just say, oh yes, I'm absurd and I will live every moment being aware of this. No, we try somehow to prove to ourselves that we're worthy of all of this attention, that we are destined, determined to give ourselves. That is such an extra burden we take on in being human. So all power to us, even if we do it terribly, which many of us do. Yes, we do. That is, the justification is not good. We may try to do it by gaining power over others or, being tyrant of the universe or whatever. But, a friend of mine he became a friend who I profile in the book, who was a Nazi, who was a neo-Nazi. He was going to prove his worthiness by putting the order right. White Christian males on top and everybody else beneath. And so that was his, what I call mannering project. So we could do it quite terribly, but there's something very estimable and dignified about the fact that we take on this task.
Yeah, well, I mean, it is indeed a grand theory, because it suggests that, everything that is amazing and beautiful and great about the human species, it flows from this instinct, but also all of the misery and all of the suffering and despair also comes from this instinct. And so you have a wonderful retelling of the book of Genesis, right? And I want you to kind of recount it for us, because in your version, it seems like the fall is basically human discovery of the second law of thermodynamics, right? It's like the human discovery of the potential that we are just matter, but that we might matter, right? And that to really matter is to realize that you're more than matter.
Or that your matter, well, you see, we are indeed dust, dust we are, and to dust we shall return, but we're dust with dignity. That is, there's a dignity to this. And that, what is described in theological terms as the fall, I say as the ascent into humanness. So yeah, paradise was living without entropy. There was no death in the Garden of Eden. Of course, this is
Well,
all
or there was no
metaphor.
awareness. There was no awareness of death,
Certainly
right?
no, and I tell this story because I was brought up very religious. I was brought up in a very religious household. I mean, so religious that I was supposed to get married very early, which I did, and just procreate. So, but knowledge was knowledge was extremely important to me. And so as a child, I found it so baffling that in the Garden of Eden, there were these two trees. They could do anything they wanted in that garden, but and there were just two laws: not to eat from the tree of life or the tree of knowledge. And I thought, the tree of knowledge, but knowledge is good. Why would God forbid us knowledge? It was so baffling to me. And so I retell this story and making um, the woman kind of the hero of the story, which she sort of is. And uh, and this the with that first bite, what they realized is that they were naked. That is, that they were animals. That they were animals just like all the other animals. That somehow they had been promised to be special, but they really weren't special. It wasn't even language that made them special, because there was a snake who could talk. Right? That's part of the story. Um, but and that it was sort of they left the paradise of their own volition, having once realized that was when they became human, and when they realized, oh, I'm just this. How can I be more? How can I live with myself knowing that I'm just this, and that I will die, and entering into this world of entropy, where everything eventually runs out of energy and does die. The universe itself will run out of energy, and the thermal equilibrium that awaits the universe, and uh, so that they took on, with that stepping out of paradise, they took on the burden, but the dignity of being human, of trying to justify, becoming homo justificans, becoming creatures who are in search of values that will justify them in their own eyes. We come up with a whole bunch of values, and we disagree tremendously about these values, but there's something so grand about being creatures who need values in order to be able to live with themselves, even if they're bad values, but that we bring values into the universe because we are creatures longing to matter. So, it's helped me to reconcile myself to my species, which, of course, living through these times when it's often so horrified by what one's fellow creatures are doing to one another. And, the choices that are being made in trying to satisfy, to appease this longing to matter, they're often choices that lead more to destruction than to creation. But yet, there's something noble in the species itself, in needing values in order to live. I don't know. It's almost like a meditative thing I go through after I read the New York Times every morning.
Well, it's not as new as some people think, right? So,
Yes.
your hero Spinoza, I mean, he had some similar horrific things going on in his world, right? That he had to deal with.
Absolutely. But some of us got used to the idea that we were together making progress, that that the widening of the notion of human rights, being true to this most basic of all ethical truths, which is, in some sense, being human really matters, no matter what kind of human you are. This very longing to matter, there's something ennobling about that. There's something unique and precious about that. And it's true wherever there's a human life. And so, we had somehow, it seemed to be ever since, Spinoza's time, that we were sort of going forward with recognizing this and in practical ways, new laws that would recognize the rights of all humans for life, liberty, and the pursuit of not so much happiness, because happiness comes and goes, but flourishing, a life of flourishing, a life of meaningfulness on one's own terms. So, yeah, in that sense, this has been a disappointing time. It seems that, it's one step forward and two steps back instead of two steps forward and one step back. It seems like there's regression, but maybe that's a finite amount of time. It just happens to be the time we're living in.
Well, look, people talk about happiness and they talk about meaning and they talk about flourishing. And of course, there is the Greek concept of eudaimonia. How does the mattering instinct relate to those other notions of human well-being and flourishing?
Yeah. Yeah. So you did talk, about happiness, and it depends what you mean by happiness. If you mean this emotion that comes and goes, and that is
the episodic happiness.
Happiness, right? Which, again, evolution has given us these emotions so that we can adjust ourselves to ever-changing circumstances. Fear, back away; happiness, oh, keep going. But these are changing circumstances, and that these episodic emotions, and happiness is one of them, gives us some feedback about how our overall project of surviving and thriving is doing, given these changing circumstances. So there's episodic happiness, but then there's what the Greeks have called eudaimonia, which is closer to what the psychologists talk about when they talk about life satisfaction. So this sort of much more long view that we can take, sort of stepping outside our lives in self-reflection, and this is going pretty well. And I think and that's also flourishing. I think that term, these basically mean pretty much the same thing. And, and the way psychologists test it is through this Cantrell ladder. It's, taking the long view. How good is my life compared to these other ways it could have gone? And that's very, very different. It's much more self-reflective. And a dog wagging his tail is feeling happiness. But this kind of self-reflective, how well is my life going? I think only humans with our capacity for self-reflection and counterfactual thinking. I have to be able to think counterfactually. Well, I could have, I could have written a bestseller, but I haven't. And so it could be better. But so where do you stand in terms of the way your life could have gone? And that's quite different from happiness. And I think there are, I think, two components that are necessary for this life of flourishing or life satisfaction, more or less life satisfaction. And one is clearly close ties with others, to have others in your lives who are going to pay you attention whether you deserve it or not.
Connectedness.
Connectedness, what I call connectedness. So we are gregarious creatures, but there are other species that are gregarious. We're not unique in this, but it is an absolute, for almost all of us. I've known some real loners. They tend to be mathematicians, the ones that I've known, who don't seem to need anybody. They live in the world of numbers, and that's all they want. But for most of us, we need some very strong connections, people who will notice if we disappear off the face of the earth and will care about it. But there is this other thing, that no other creature has, and that is this way of being able to justify all the attention that we give ourselves in our lives. Something, and that often involves some kind of project, a mattering project, where project is used very loosely. It doesn't really have a beginning or an end, but the kind of thing that is, keeps you engaged in your life, gets you up in the morning and down the stairs. And I have been talking to people about this for over 40 years, ever since this mattering idea came up to me, just because I find it the most fascinating topic of conversation. I never planned to write a book about it, but it is, for example, I was waiting, this was quite a few years ago, about 20 years ago. I was waiting for somebody in a Manhattan hotel lobby, and this guy comes up and he's trying to pick me up, basically, is what he's trying to do. And so I start talking to him about his life and mattering and this stuff. And he was a pickup artist. That was his mattering project. And we spent the whole, next 45 minutes talking about this. And he had his stats, like how successful he was at this. It was a kind of athletic sport for him. He had his heroes, he had his books that he studied, and it was an art. And so, it was just so fascinating to me, the various ways that people have of feeling that, they matter, that they matter. And I divide us up into there are four kind of strategies, and we can use all four of them, over the course of our life. But what I found with most people is one tends to dominate for whatever reasons, temperamental or cultural, talents, passions, interests, whatever. For some, there are these four strategies.
Well, look, this falls neatly into the Freudian work and love, right? These two things.
Can I just stop for one moment? Because I didn't really answer your... So this mattering project, in some sense, if it's working for you, your life feels meaningful and you feel like you have a purpose, and your life feels coherent. That these terms that are used in psychology, a purpose, coherence, mattering, I think all of those, I think the mattering instinct lies beneath it, and it really comes from deep within the laws that make us, but that the mattering project that we take on, these other terms, meaningfulness, meaning and purpose and coherence, and a sense of subjective mattering, all fall out of that, of a successful mattering project.
Well, it's kind of a puzzle, though, from an evolutionary perspective, right? Because, you refer to it as the mattering instinct. And look, I don't think anybody would find any difficulty in understanding, like, the connectedness instinct, right? For instance. And certainly when it comes to mattering to others, right? Like, okay, that we can explain.
Yes.
If you matter to others, you're going to get more resources. You're going to, be under less threat. But why would we ever have an instinct to matter to ourselves? Like, why would we? It almost seems dysfunctional, right?
Yes.
And so is it a mere spandrel? Is it just sort of a byproduct?
I think it is a byproduct of these two things. The self-mattering that is easily explained, that if, our creaturely instinct is to push against entropy, to survive and to thrive, and that is to push against entropy.
But we can do that in a non-reflective way, right?
Exactly, and all other creatures do. In creatures that have evolved attention, of course, not all living things evolved attention, but in more complicated creatures that have evolved, the adaptation of attention is something, again, you can explain according to evolutionary theory. It helps us. Oh, food, yes, go. Predators, run. So attention is a way of being able to more flexibly respond to the changes in our environment that can thwart us or help us in our chances to pass on our genes. So attention is an adaptation. Given that attention evolved in order to help us in our own surviving and get what we can out of changing circumstances, it's not surprising that most of our attention is fixated on our environment and how it affects us. So that self-mattering, that is feeling oneself deserving of one's own attention, that can be totally explained in terms of evolutionary theory. So far, so good for, evolutionary theory. But we also evolved this capacity with these great big brains that we've evolved. We evolved this capacity for, first of all, for theory of mind, for understanding others who are very different from us. And that, again, we are gregarious creatures. We are not only gregarious creatures, but we're very helpless for a very long time. We're what they call altricial. That is, it takes a really long time for us to gain it takes a really long time for these very big brains to come into place, and so that we can actually take responsibility for ourselves until the prefrontal lobes actually come into place. We're already in our 20s. And that's, again, a function of these very big brains. We're born with our brains really undeveloped, 30% developed, because it's hard enough to get that head out of the birth canal. We have evolved these very large brains. And so we are dependent on others for a very long time. And so we've developed this capacity to read others, that, we call theory of mind, to understand those who have very different beliefs and desires than we do. And it kicks in pretty young, 3-4 years old. Kids are already understanding that. Okay, so we've evolved all of this, and we can give nice evolutionary explanations for all this. But then, given this theory of mind, we can turn that. We can turn that on ourselves. We can look at ourselves as another object in the world to try to understand and to interrogate. That was a kind of spandrel, that this self-reflection comes along with this well-developed theory of mind. And one of the things that we discover is that, God damn it, we pay an awful lot of attention to ourselves. Am I worth it? Am I really worth it? And I think deep down, we've all confronted that. It often happens in late childhood, adolescent, a kind of dissatisfaction. What am I? What can I be more? It's the way that I judge how much something matters is how much attention I pay to it. Then I would seem to judge myself to matter more than anything in the whole universe. And short of lunacy, we know that's not true. Obviously, each of us know we're just some arbitrary thing in the universe. It's that existential confrontation with yourself, which the existentialists call the absurd, that gets us going in this business of trying to justify ourselves to ourselves.
Well, I mean, it does seem that there's a matter of degree, right? So some people are more reflective than others, and
yes.
Philosophers are, at the top, right?
Yes.
and it seems like the more reflective you are, the less satisfied you will be with a mere subjective sense of mattering, right? You want to tie it to some objective criteria. So, if you are getting all sorts of satisfaction out of your pickup artistry as your mattering project.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're more reflective, you're like, well, wait a second, is this the best mattering project I could have picked? Right.
Right.
I mean, isn't
Absolutely.
poetry better than pushpin? Right. I mean, to use Mill's phraseology.
Yes. Yeah. But see, and what I would say to that, and I do try to distinguish between better and worse ways of satisfying this thing. But the one thing I want to recognize is that we're all even the pickup artist, or even my ex-Nazi friend, which a very bad mattering project did he have, a terrible mattering project. But even they were involved in trying somehow to justify themselves, to themselves. Oh, look at all the women I picked up. Or, oh, I am fighting for the superior race to take its rightful place again. After these lesser people are turning the mattering order upside down. That these are projects that people take on in order, I would say, essentially, to be able to live with themselves, and that there's something in that. There's something. I just dignity. I had always heard this phrase, the intrinsic dignity of human life, and it always sounded like bullshit to me. Like, what does that mean? What does that mean? To me now, this is what it means, that we're in this business of trying to live a meaningful life in our own eyes, even if we're doing it quite badly. It's still something that we take. It's an extra burden, or another way of putting it is, it's hard to be human. It's we take on an extra burden. It's hard to be human. I liked also the Genesis says, by the sweat of their brow, they will have to work. By the sweat of their brow, we will have to work to be able to live with ourselves.
But it seems like we also want to universalize our project, right? And we want our project to be the project that Pascal, right? He would point to everyone else's projects and say, "You guys are just deluding yourselves, right? You're building your little castles in the sand, and you're missing the real project you should be focused on."
Exactly, which is God's purpose for you. You were created for a purpose. You have a role to play in the narrative of eternity, and that is one of the strategies. I call it the what do I call
transcendent.
The transcendent, or the cosmic mattering. You matter to the universe at large. You were created for a purpose, and that for many millennia that persisted. The Greeks had sort of begun a secular way of trying to justify ourselves. The unexamined life is not worth living. That is such a statement of what you need to achieve in order to matter. It's the holy statement of secular philosophy, of secular Western philosophy. But religion, has another way of trying to appease the mattering instinct. And it's a very powerful way. There is nothing more having lived the first 13 or 14, 13 years of my life, believing that I had been created for a purpose by God Almighty, who was constantly watching me. I know what it feels like to feel like you are carrying this tremendous mattering. You matter to God. What more? What higher source of mattering could there be? So it's and I really do think.
Well, and if you do believe that, you would feel compelled. You would feel compelled to let everyone into the good news, right? You'd want everybody to know.
Exactly. So to universalize, I call it, it's the urge to universalize your own means of mattering, and that you could truly understand why those who have a metaphysical view of mattering, that there is a trans-empirical source of mattering, whether you call it God or something vaguer. We're all living in that reality, so you better let people know. So, of course, there's an urge for transcenders to want to universalize this. But what's so interesting to me, Greg, and you put your finger on it, is that this takes place all over the mattering map. And I collect such statements. I don't collect things. I
know a lot of these guys like, well, if you don't climb mountains in the wintertime, like you don't have a reason to live. You're like,
you're
wait,
an
what?
earthworm. You are an earthworm. Or, one of my favorite is Diana Freeland, who had been the editor of Vogue magazine, and said, if people who don't dress well, what would get them down the stairs in the morning without, dressing well? You're nothing. You're nobody, which would mean most of my colleagues are nothing or nobody.
Academics are definitely not in that category.
Or this strongman who says, people who can't do a deadlift are might as well not have been born. It's so interesting. And why is that? There's a deep reason for that too. If this is something that we're really staking our life on, and we're saying, look, my mattering to myself is not arbitrary. It's not that I just happen to be me. I'm doing something to earn this self-mattering. I'm earning some of it back. And you don't want it to be arbitrary. You want it to be objective because you're trying to ground your own objective mattering on it. So there's a great urge to universalize it. And that leads to a lot of deep, uh, I don't know, controversy between
Yeah.
us and, the secular people saying, you're, to the religious people that you're, living on a delusion and, and the religious people saying, what gets you up? I've been told this, many times because I'm not a religious believer. What gets you up in the morning? Why do you have any reason to live? But there are other ways of going about this, trying to justify our own existence in our own eyes, and in fact, three other ways that I have found that people have, and one of them is what I call the heroic strivers, and where you have certain standards of excellence in mind that really matter to you. It could be intellectual, it could be artistic, it could be athletic, it could be ethical, it could be entrepreneurial, it could be military. There are so many different standards, and you want to achieve them or at least come closer to them, to asymptotically approach them. So, and that makes you feel as if, and you may not be trying to achieve something very great. You may not be trying to break any records. Just be able to run the marathon, and not conk out. And that is keeping, and you're practicing for this and that's your goal and it keeps you engaged in your life. But we need something to keep us engaged in our lives.
Well, it seems like a liberal society is one that has to allow for lots of different mattering projects. And I don't know. I feel like, on the one hand, everybody should pursue a life of virtue and should live the examined life. And I try to get all the people around me to be like that. But at the same time, when I look at something like, Lindsey Vonn doing her thing,
yes,
it's just like, you have this incredible appreciation and admiration, and you don't really care if she's, I don't care if she's thinking about, the virtues. It's like, it's a beautiful thing to see, right?
It's a beautiful thing to see. Or, the grandmother who was taking on the care of her children because the mother can't do it. And she is in her old age raising these children and giving everything, trying to give these kids a flourishing life. This is a beautiful thing. It needn't be something record-breaking and heroic. Of course, as a heroic striver, those stories inspire me, right? The story of Spinoza inspires me. The story of Wittgenstein inspires me. But it's, on the mattering mat, we each have our heroes, the people who have... who have attained something that we would hope to attain in this life, and who are inspirations to us. But for ourselves, it needn't be anything grand. One of the things is, I think, our society right now. It used to be we lived in more religious times, and
that fourth type of mattering seems to be, I don't know, fading away from humanity in a way.
Yes. The fourth type, the transcendent.
The transcendent.
Yeah. And even though people, may be going to their houses of worship, there's a difference between that and, go there for community or whatever. There's a difference between that and really seeing your life in those terms, right? This is what I need, this is what I need to be doing, trying to propitiate the on high, that, or live in a way that the on high would find appropriate and deserving. So, yeah, I think that is fading away, and in its place, in terms of society at large, the people who seem to matter the most. And the wonderful thing about sort of the religious idea, and I say this as an atheist, was that, we all mattered. If we were here, we mattered. We were created in the image of God, and therefore we mattered. And that has faded away. And in its place, we have a great, there's inequity in terms of mattering. There are people who matter a lot, the rich, the famous, the powerful. And everybody wants that because those are the
Yeah.
people who matter the most. And we're not, of course, all made to be billionaires or famous or powerful. So it's a dissatisfactory substitution.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's the question I have for you. I mean, we know that, right, connectedness is when connectedness fades or is reduced, right, it's replaced with loneliness. And a lot of people have been talking about the loneliness epidemic. But when mattering fades, right,
Yeah.
it's replaced by despair, right? It's
Exactly.
replaced by, what is it, dysthemia, right? There is a lack of mattering, a lack of meaning. And I wonder, I mean, if there are 4 types of mattering and one of them is kind of fading off into the sunset,
Yeah.
are the other 3 kinds of mattering, do they have enough potential to fill that gap? Can we fall back on those 3 to kind of avoid the despair that seems to be the end product of our psychological entropy?
I think we better. I mean, that this is, and given that we now have AI on the horizon, which is going to be able to be doing some of the things that heroic strivers take on to justify themselves to themselves, writing.
Well, I mean, AI seems to be giving us the real possibility of Nozick's experience machine, right? I mean, we can. That's no longer a fantasy. Like that's a reality. We can plug in.
We can plug in, exactly. And none of us would want to plug it in because we want to make something of our own lives. It's this life that I'm living for this short time that I don't want to feel like it was a waste, that I might as well not have shown up for my existence at all. It means the world to me, as everybody's life means the world to them. But, one of the wonderful ways that we could, deal with this in the face of AI and the eclipse of the transcendent strategy is to take each other's needs to matter to heart and to try to make our mattering projects be projects that will add to others' mattering projects as well. That to be able to that is the ethical striving. AI can't take that away from us, right? That is, it can't do that for us, and that is one of the ways that we could strive to matter, to help other creatures, including humans, perhaps most importantly humans, but other creatures in general, be able to do what they need to do to resist entropy, to resist destruction, to resist sickness, unhappiness, suffering, all of these things. And the other thing I feel, and again, I feel like AI will not take this away from us either, is, it's part of our project as self-justificatory creatures to try to make sense of our lives in the largest way possible, and to understand what we are and in this time, and again, AI could spout out, answers to this. But that's not going to help us. It's the responsibility for each of us, and that's the way we get the most out of our lives, I think. I guess I'm saying again, I myself, I'm falling back on a kind of urge to universalize. That is,
Right.
right.
Yeah. It seems you can't not, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And it's, and if whatever it is that's most helping us deal with the burden of living a human life, it is a burden. Justification, it's a burden. There's something noble and beautiful and wonderful about it, and it can lead to beautiful things, but it can also lead to atrocities. It also, why? Because it's the core of what we are. It is our humanness, and we know that our humanness is such that it can lead to great achievements and great atrocities.
Well, you talk about these three different territories on the mattering map, right?
Yeah.
The social, the heroic, and the competitive. And you said these line up with personality types. And so I was actually unfamiliar with the McClellan-Murray personalities. I don't know how I got to this age, and I was unfamiliar with this
It's
area
interesting.
of psychological research. And so, I mean, is it the psychological type that may lead to the type of mattering project, or is it the mattering project that kind of shapes the psychology?
Probably both, that we are creatures of both, nature and nurture, and you grow up in a community that values intellectual achievement. There's a good chance you're going to value it. But there is, there is, and a lot of it is probably genetic. I mean, who knows? This is something that I find really interesting, and it's empirical. It would have to be tested and more subject to more empirical evidence. But yeah, that they had carved out that there are these three types of personality, and that we all have some elements in us of the three types, but one type tends to predominate. And those who are going after achievement, those who are going after, they called it affiliation, and those who are going after power. And this sort of lines up with those other three types, and what I call the heroic strivers, the socializers, and the competitors. Competitors are interesting. And again, I've met many people of this sort. I've met a lot of people in academia of this sort, where they really judge how much they matter in terms of how much they matter more than others. And so it's a very zero-sum game to the extent that others matter. It's taking something away from them.
Yeah.
And so they're very prone to envy, jealousy, that sort of thing.
Well, I mean, you don't use this language, but it seems like there is a virtuous and a vicious way of manifesting, all of these different mattering projects.
Yes.
Right?
So, yeah, I would not want to say, wouldn't want to say that they're all equal in terms of desirability, either for the person or for, morally, for society at large. That some seem to be, you said virtuous and
vicious,
and vicious, and I would say creative or destructive. That there are ways, and again, I would bring in entropy as a sort of...
your moral vector seems to be aligned with pro-entropic and anti-entropic. Right?
That's right, exactly right. That life, since life is the struggle, is always the struggle against entropy, there seems to be something non-arbitrary about being on the side of being against entropy, against disorder, and for the kinds of order that lead to flourishing. To be on the side that seems less arbitrary than other ways of distinguishing, now that we've given up the holy books to tell us what's virtuous and what's vicious, I'd rather, turn to something that seems non-arbitrary and that there's some science behind it, that life is a struggle against entropy. So let's be on the side of life against disorder.
But I mean, it seems paradoxical because, the laws of thermodynamics suggest that if you are reducing entropy in one place, you're probably creating it in some other place, right?
Exactly right.
You're just kind of reshuffling the entropy, right?
This is true. Yes, this is true. And by the way, I would not apply this standard, counter entropy good, that I wouldn't apply this to society at large, but rather to one's own life and one's effect on other people's lives, so that clearly there are societies in which there is very low entropy because there's very little freedom. And there's a tyrant on top keeping order, and anybody who disobeys is, off to the gulag with you. I would not advocate this standard for societies at large. But in terms of one's own life, I mean, in some sense, you want some order, some coherence in your own life. This is something that we need in order to have a satisfactory, a flourishing life. And I think, a good mentoring project gives that to us. We feel like we have some coherence, some reason that we're getting on. And then it could be a way that causes great, even though it's doing a lot for one's own life, it could be causing great destruction in other people's lives, great disorder, suffering, death, displacement, chaos. And I would say that's not good. And that sort of captures something of what we want from the moral life.
Yeah. Well, so it seems like the thing that makes us human is our desire to think of ourselves as different from all the other animals, right?
Yes.
And I think it was in Plato and the Googleplex. You talked about Plato and Aristotle and how they had this belief in excellence as something worthy of pursuit, and it seems like even though heroic striving is just one of the three, it does seem like in all three of these types of mattering projects there is a pursuit of excellence, right? A way of being better in some way, and better than the animals, but also better than others, or better than what you could otherwise be, right?
Yeah, and it always takes great effort.
Yeah.
That there is again, it's a you have to be resisting something. For example, just resisting the urge to only care about yourself and what you can get away with and all that you can grab. To resist that takes a tremendous amount of effort and reflection and perspective and work work. But it's again, I think there's something here. Thank you, because you're pushing, and that's good because you're helping me refine the ideas. But I feel there's something noble in just the task of trying to justify yourself. But there's an extra nobility, in trying to make your mattering such so that the mattering of as much of the world out there can also be taken into account.
And this is what you call getting mattering right?
That's what I call getting mattering right.
So it takes a lot of work to do the work of mattering, right? But it takes maybe a little bit of extra work to get it right.
Yes, because we are so wired to take our own self-mattering at face value and just to plow on and try to do the best for ourselves and I guess for our own kin. All of this is explained by Darwinism. But to get beyond Darwinism, which is our privilege as human beings, that we actually have a privilege that we can get beyond the simple Darwinism and wrestle with all of this, this unknown confusion, is a kind of privilege, and that's an added nobility. and to live with the uncertainty of it all is and to face up to it. Again, is even more ennobling, I would say. Yeah. Does any of this make sense?
Well, yeah. I mean, look, you have a lot of heroes in the book, and one of them is William James, right? And he's an incredible person as a human being and as a philosopher and a psychologist. But it's really, William James is, I guess, he is the person who is most responsible for the birthing of psychology out of philosophy, right? And I'm wondering, was that separation one that was more fruitful than harmful? I mean, it seems like what you're doing is kind of encouraging a reintegration of the two. And I just remember from from your first novel, right? The advisor of the main character, right, was dismissive of any kind of philosophy other than analytical philosophy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so do we need to kind of bring philosophy back to its psychological, right, roots in some way? Do we need to, and I guess the additional question, you have some great comments in Plato at the Googleplex about philosophy of science and how, scientists are very dismissive of philosophy of science, and yet they couldn't do what they do without philosophy of science. Do we need to encourage scientists to refresh their understanding of philosophy?
I think it would be a good thing. I think, I don't want to force my mentoring project on anybody else, right? But for me, this attempt to try to see how everything hangs together in the largest sense possible, it makes my life interesting. It keeps me engaged, and that I can sense and I always think that there are these connections, like the law. As soon as I learned the second law of thermodynamics, I thought, what does this mean for humans? There's a tragic aspect in this second law of thermodynamics. Everything is going towards disorder and therefore towards death and destruction, and that there is, so just to try to use all of these great gifts that humanity has given us in its attempt to justify itself to itself. I mean, that is, and just see how it all hangs together. I think it all, in some sense, does hang together. Art and science and philosophy and the social sciences and math and all of these things, and certainly philosophy. And I think that is the goal of philosophy. It can seem like a lot of, does it produce any new knowledge? No, maybe what it's trying to do is just see how all of knowledge hangs together in some very deep way. And for me, that's what keeps me going.
That's your mentoring project.
That's my mentoring project.
There we go.
I am very grateful for the people who dig down deep on very narrow subjects. That's their mentoring project. That's what they want to do. And I can use their knowledge. And I do, I study them going very, very deep in very small areas to try to get a sense of how everything hangs together. So here's what I'm going to say. Yeah, we're all alike in that we have this profound need and burden that we take on in being human. But there is such diversity between us and how we go about this. And as long as we do it in ways that are good for ourselves and not destructive to others, go in good health, do it. If it can be very small, it can be very large. It's hard to be human. And if it's helping you and it's not hurting others, do it. And we just need us and our great diversity. I would not want everybody to be a philosopher. who would sell me my shoes?
Right. Well, look, Rebecca, thanks so much for joining me. This latest book is called The Mattering Instinct, How Our Deepest Longing Drives Us and Divides Us. But luckily, all your other books, I think, are still in print, and you have a chance. Mind-Body Problem is still a classic. Check it out.
Oh, thank you so much. This has been such a pleasure to talk with you. You worked me hard, and I thank you for it.
Unsiloed podcast is produced by University FM, elevating the stories of your institution.